The courtroom fell silent as the elderly judge stared at the document in his trembling hands. His reading glasses slipped down his nose as his eyes widened with each word. Beside him, court officers shifted uncomfortably. Outside the mahogany doors of the Lagos High Court, cameras flashed and journalists pushed against barriers, desperate for a glimpse of what was about to unfold. Inside, nobody could believe what they were witnessing. Zainab Okonkwo stood alone in the gallery, her simple white head wrap and faded blue wrapper making her nearly invisible against the polished wood paneling. Her bare feet, calloused from 30 years of scrubbing floors, were steady on the cold marble tiles. She did not smile. She did not cry. She simply stood there, watching the world she had served crumble before her eyes. The man sitting at the defendant's table was Chuka Adeyemi, billionaire, philanthropist, the face of modern African success. He built shopping malls and luxury hotels across the continent. His face graced magazine covers. Tech companies bore his name. He had spent the last hour in this courtroom boasting about his empire, his intelligence, his right to inherit the 15 billion naira estate that had been left in legal limbo for 6 months. His lawyers had smiled confidently. His business associates nodded in agreement from the gallery. His wife, draped in designer clothes that cost more than most Nigerians earned in a year, had whispered encouragement in his ear. They all knew Zainab. They had all mocked her. The judge cleared his throat. His voice, when it came, seemed to echo from somewhere far away. According to this legal document, he began slowly. The entire estate of Chief Amadi Okonkwo, valued at approximately 15 billion naira, as well as his properties across 5 African countries and his majority shares in 4 major corporations, belonged to. The judge paused. His eyes moved to Zainab, to Miss Zainab Okonkwo. The courtroom erupted. Chuka Adeyemi's face turned white then red. His wife gasped. His lawyers jumped to their feet, shouting objections. But the judge continued, his voice steady and certain. Chief Amadi made this will amendment exactly 12 months ago. It was legally witnessed, notarized, and filed properly. There is no legal grounds to contest it. Cameras outside went absolutely crazy. Within minutes, the news was spreading across Nigeria, across Africa, across the world. Twitter was already on fire. WhatsApp groups were exploding with messages and conspiracy theories. But nobody could explain how a maid, a woman who earned barely 50,000 naira a month, had become one of Africa's richest people. Nobody except the people who had known her. The people who had worked in that house. The people who had watched her clean their toilets, wash their dishes, and sleep on a foam mattress in the kitchen. The real story, though, didn't start in that courtroom. It started 25 years earlier, in a much smaller house, with a much younger Zainab. You see, Zainab wasn't always a maid. That's what made this story so shocking. That's what nobody understood when they saw her kneeling to scrub floors or carrying heavy loads of laundry on her head. They saw her position in life and made their judgment. They never asked her story. They never wondered how a woman so intelligent, so capable, so dignified, had ended up cleaning houses for a living. But there were clues if anyone had bothered to look. The way she could calculate a household budget in her head without writing anything down. The way she understood business discussions even when she stood silently in the corner serving drinks. The way her hands, though rough from work, moved with the grace of someone educated. The way she never gossiped, never complained, and always did her job with perfection. Chief Amadi had noticed. And that's where this incredible story truly begins. But before I take you back to that beginning, I want to ask you something important. Where are you watching from right now? Are you in Nigeria? In the diaspora? In another African country? Or somewhere else entirely? Drop your location in the comments below. I want to connect with as many of you as possible as we uncover this amazing story together. And if you're already sensing that this is going to be one of the most incredible stories you've heard, hit that subscribe button now because we have so much more to reveal. The question that everyone in that courtroom wanted to know was simple but profound. How did a maid become richer than the billionaires? But the real question, the one that would change how you see wealth, success, and what it really means to be rich, was much deeper. Stay with me as we go back in time. Because what happened in Chief Amadi's house wasn't just a story about money. It was a story about transformation. It was a story about the power of integrity, intelligence, and trust. And it was a story about how one woman's dignity, preserved in the face of mockery and shame, became the foundation of an empire. Chapter 2 is where we meet Zainab as a young woman, when everything was different. This is where we discover the tragedy that changed everything. And this is where we learn why she made the choice that would eventually lead to this incredible moment in that courtroom. Are you ready? Zainab was 19 years old when her father died. She remembers the morning like it was yesterday, even though 25 years have passed. The rooster hadn't even crowed yet. The sun was still sleeping somewhere beyond the horizon. She was preparing cassava flour in the kitchen of her family's small compound in Ibadan when her mother began to scream. Those screams changed everything. Her father, Okonkwo, had been a trader. Not a rich trader, but an honest one. He bought fabrics from Lagos and sold them to tailors across the southwestern region of Nigeria. It wasn't glamorous work, but it had been steady. He had provided for his family of 5 children and 1 wife. He had dreams. Zainab's father had always said that his children would be educated. That Zainab, his brightest child, would become a lawyer or a doctor. But her father had made one mistake. One decision that seemed small at the time but carried consequences that would reshape Zainab's entire life. He had loaned a large sum of money to his brother, Chidi, to start a construction business. It was a family loan. No papers were signed. No interest was calculated. It was just the kind of thing families did. Except Chidi disappeared with the money. And Zainab's father, heartbroken and shamed, had a heart attack 3 months later while trying to find his brother. Within weeks, the creditors came. Zainab's mother had to sell everything. The house, the fabric inventory, even her jewelry. But it still wasn't enough. The debts were enormous. And nobody wanted to hire a widow with 4 children in school and a teenager at home. Zainab was forced to drop out of secondary school in her final year. She had been brilliant. Her teachers said she had the highest marks in her class. They said she could have gotten a scholarship to university. But none of that mattered when there was no money for school fees and an entire family that depended on her. She was 18 when she started working as a housemaid. She was 19 when she started working in Chief Amadi Okonkwo's house, and yes, the name was coincidence. This Okonkwo had no relation to her father's side. Chief Amadi was a successful businessman. He owned import and export companies. He had properties in 3 countries. But more importantly, he was recently widowed. His wife had died 2 years earlier, and his 3 adult children had returned to their own lives in Lagos, Accra, and London. He needed someone to manage his household in Ibadan, someone trustworthy, someone who would treat his home with respect. Zainab was that person. Those first years were not easy. Chief Amadi's extended family and business associates visited frequently. His cousins looked at Zainab with suspicion and sometimes contempt. The way they spoke about her when they thought she couldn't hear them was cruel. They called her names. They suggested she was stealing. One cousin, a woman named Neka who was married to a particularly wealthy businessman, actually searched Zainab's small room while she was cleaning the main house, looking for valuables. She found nothing because there was nothing. Zainab's entire life's possessions fit into a small box. Her work clothes, a Bible, a photograph of her parents, and less than 3,000 naira saved from her wages. But Zainab never complained. She never stole. She never gave them any reason to doubt her except for one thing. She listened. That's where her transformation really began. Sitting in the kitchen while Chief Amadi conducted business meetings in the adjacent room. Listening as he discussed investments, property deals, and market trends. Listening as he talked with his accountant about which ventures were succeeding and which were failing. She absorbed it all like the earth absorbs rain. One day, about 2 years into her service, Chief Amadi left documents on the dining table. Account statements, investment portfolios, business proposals. He had called her to clear the table, but he left them out deliberately. She later understood this was a test. Zainab saw an error in his investment calculations. A serious one. She had calculated it in her head while collecting the plates. She was terrified as she approached Chief Amadi later that evening, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would burst from her chest. "Sir," she had said quietly, I believe there is an error in the investment account from Tuesday. The percentage calculation, it does not match the amount written." She braced herself for anger or dismissal. Instead, Chief Amadi had looked at her carefully, then picked up the documents. He checked her calculation. His eyes widened. She was right. There was an error. A significant error that would have cost him a great deal of money. That moment changed how he saw her. Not as a maid, but as a person. An intelligent person. A capable person. From that day forward, things shifted slowly. Chief Amadi began asking her opinion on small household business matters. How should he invest in the new restaurant? What did she think about the property development opportunity in Lekki? She answered thoughtfully, carefully, drawing on what she had learned through listening and her own instincts about human nature and sustainability. She was right more often than she was wrong. Within 5 years, Zainab had become Chief Amadi's trusted confidant. She knew the passwords to his bank accounts. She understood his business ventures. She could speak knowledgeably about currency markets and property values. And yet, in the eyes of his family and associates, she remained invisible. A maid. The mockery intensified as Chief Amadi relied on her more and more. When his cousins visited and he asked for her advice in front of them, they would exchange looks of contempt and amusement. They said things like, "What could a housemaid possibly know about business?" And, "Chief is getting old and sentimental." They would laugh at her when she wasn't supposed to hear them. They gave her extra work to do when they visited, seemingly trying to keep her in her place. Neka, that same cousin who had searched her room, became particularly cruel. She would tell her friends that Chief Amadi was losing his mind, listening to a maid's business advice. She would try to convince her mother, Chief Amadi's sister, that Zainab was manipulating the old man, that she was using witchcraft, which was a serious accusation in their culture. But Zainab endured all of it with a quiet dignity that was almost supernatural. I have to stop here and ask all of you watching, what would you have done in Zainab's situation? If everyone mocked you, if everyone looked down on you, if everyone assumed the worst of you, would you have continued to work hard? Would you have maintained your integrity? Or would you have given in to anger or bitterness? Tell me in the comment section. Share your thoughts. And while you're at it, if you're finding this story as gripping as I am, please like this video and share it with your friends and family. This is the kind of story that deserves to be shared. Because what happens next is where the real miracle begins. What happens next is where Zainab's choice to remain dignified, to remain intelligent, and to remain faithful finally gets rewarded in a way nobody could have predicted. Chief Amadi was sick in his final year. Cancer. He knew he was dying. And as he lay in his bed during those last months, he made a decision that would shock the entire family and change Zainab's life forever. Chief Amadi died on a Tuesday morning in November. Zainab was there when it happened. She was sitting beside his bed as she had done every day for the past 3 months, not as a maid anymore, but as something more. A daughter, perhaps. A confidant. A trusted friend. His last words were to her. He reached out his thin, papery hand and squeezed hers. "Thank you," he whispered, "for seeing me, for listening, for never asking for anything, but always giving everything." She wept. The family heard her crying from the other rooms and came running. For the first time, some of them looked at her with something other than contempt. Grief softens people sometimes. It makes them capable of seeing the pain of others. The funeral was large. Chief Amadi had been important in Ibadan's business community. There were government officials, business leaders, and hundreds of common people whose lives he had touched through his charities and dealings. His 3 adult children flew in from across the continent. His extended family gathered in force. They gathered even more when the will was read. Chief Amadi had left his main house in Ibadan to his eldest son, Khalid. He left his properties in Accra to his daughter, Amara. He left his holdings in London to his youngest son, Oluwaseun. He left money to various charities that had been close to his heart. He left generous amounts to all his siblings and their children. He left pensions for his house staff and drivers. And then the lawyer, reading from a document that Chief Amadi had amended 6 months before his death, said something that made the entire room freeze. To Zainab Okonkwo, I leave my minority shares in all my import and export businesses, totaling approximately 40% of their combined value, estimated at 3 billion naira. I leave her my personal investment portfolio, my advisory accounts, and all my intellectual property rights to the business models I have developed. Additionally, I leave her my private residence in Lekki, Lagos, valued at approximately 1 billion naira. These gifts are not charity. They are the earned reward for her loyalty, her intelligence, and her moral integrity. She has saved me more money than all my children combined through her wisdom and counsel. What I am giving her is merely a fraction of what she has already earned. The room exploded. Voices rose. Some family members stood up, shouting that it was impossible, that Zainab must have manipulated Chief Amadi, that this was fraud. Khalad's face turned an ugly shade of purple. Amara looked stunned. Only Alyawazian, who lived so far away and had spent less time around the family drama, remained relatively calm, though clearly shocked. Neka was the first to speak loudly. "This is a shame," she screamed. "This woman is a witch. She has bewitched my uncle. This will is invalid. It must be contested. She is nothing. Nothing. A maid who has stolen our family's fortune." But the lawyer was unmoved. The will was made when Chief Amadi was of sound mind. It was witnessed by 3 independent professionals. It was notarized at a government office. All procedures were followed legally and correctly. Unless you have evidence of undue influence, the will stands as written. That had been the beginning of a legal battle that lasted 6 months. The family had hired expensive lawyers. They had tried to prove that Zainab had used dark magic, that she had poisoned Chief Amadi's mind, that she had stolen money that should have been theirs. They brought in people who testified that they had seen her with suspicious items. They suggested that her relationship with Chief Amadi was improper, though they could provide no evidence whatsoever. But through it all, Zainab had stood firm. She had hired her own lawyers. She had produced documents showing every decision she had ever made on Chief Amadi's behalf, every investment that had succeeded, every piece of advice that had proven correct. She had character witnesses. Former clients of Chief Amadi who testified that Zainab had offered them sound counsel when she assisted their negotiations. Most importantly, she had the law on her side. Now, as she stood in that courtroom and the judge ruled in her favor, Zainab felt something shift inside her. The weight that had pressed down on her for 25 years seemed to lighten just slightly. Not because she suddenly cared what people thought. She had stopped caring about that long ago. But because for the first time, the world would have to see her as she actually was. Not as a maid. Not as a servant. Not as someone to pity or mock or suspect. But as someone worthy of respect. The immediate aftermath of that court decision was chaos. The media descended on Zainab like hungry birds. She was summoned to give interviews. Magazines wanted her story. Talk shows wanted to feature her. And Zainab, who had lived quietly for so long, suddenly found herself the most famous person in Nigeria for several weeks. She accepted some interviews. She turned down most of them. She was not interested in fame, but she was interested in justice of a different kind. Within a month of inheriting Chief Amadi's assets, Zainab made a series of decisions that shocked the business community. She took over his import and export companies and modernized them completely. She hired new management. She introduced technology that made operations more efficient. She started investing in young African entrepreneurs, providing capital and mentorship. She took Chief Amadi's business model and scaled it across the continent. More importantly, she used her newfound access to wealth to do something nobody had expected. She paid for her siblings' educations. All of them. Her younger brother became an engineer. One sister became a doctor. Another became an accountant. She bought her mother a comfortable house and ensured she would never want for anything again. She also did something that shocked everyone, including her lawyers. She took a portion of her inheritance and created a fund for workers. Maids, drivers, gardeners, and other household staff who had been loyal to their employers for years but had been treated as less than human. She established the Zainab Okonkwo Foundation to provide financial assistance, education, and business training to domestic workers across Africa. Nneka, who had screamed so loudly in that courtroom, eventually came to apologize. She appeared at Zainab's office in Lagos with her head down, her demeanor completely transformed. "I was wrong," she had said, tears streaming down her face. "I am ashamed of how I treated you, how I spoke about you. I judged you because of your position, not because of your character. Please, I beg you, can you forgive me?" Zainab had looked at this woman who had mocked her so thoroughly, who had searched her room, who had tried to destroy her in court, and she had simply smiled. "There is nothing to forgive," Zainab had said. "You taught me something valuable. You taught me that people fear what they do not understand. You feared my difference, my strength, my refusal to be diminished by my circumstances. That fear came from your own insecurity, not from anything I did. I forgave you long ago, even before you knew there was anything to be forgiven for." Nneka had wept harder at this response. And Zainab, though it was not required of her, had chosen to hire Nneka's son for a position at one of her companies. She believed in second chances. But the most important twist in this story, the one that sealed Zainab's legacy and proved that she was not just lucky, but was genuinely different, came exactly 1 year after the court victory. This is where we are heading toward the final revelation. This is where the story transforms from being about one woman's triumph to being about something much larger. Something that would inspire millions of people across Africa and around the world. Because Zainab was just getting started. Her wealth was only the beginning. What she did with it would change the narrative about who deserves to be rich and why. 1 year after the court decision, Zainab held a press conference in Lagos. She was now regularly featured in business magazines as one of Africa's most successful entrepreneurs and philanthropists. But this press conference was different. This wasn't about a new business venture or a charity announcement. This was something more profound. She had invited her childhood friends, her former teachers, the people from her neighborhood who had watched her grow up. The journalists were confused at first. This didn't seem like typical business press conference material. But Zainab had a message she wanted to share, and she wanted her own community present when she shared it. "I want to tell you something," she had said to the gathered media and her personal guests. "I want to tell you about what it means to be mocked, what it means to be underestimated, what it means to be invisible." She talked about how she had worked in Chief Amadi's house for years while his family and friends looked through her, not at her. How she had cleaned their houses and served their food while they spoke about her as if she were furniture. How they had made assumptions about her intelligence, her morality, her very humanity based on the work she did. "But here is what they didn't understand," Zainab said, her voice steady and powerful. "My position in life was circumstantial. It was not who I was. And every day, every single day, millions of people across Africa and around the world are made to feel like their circumstances are their identity. Like cleaning someone's house means you have nothing in your head. Like serving someone's food means you have no dreams. Like being poor means you are less worthy of respect." She paused, letting her words sink in. "What I want to do now is change that narrative. I want to show people that circumstances do not determine destiny. That intelligence has no uniform. That dignity is not something given by money or status, but something we all possess inherently." And then she announced the Zainab Okonkwo Scholarship and Mentorship Program. It would provide full scholarships to 5,000 young Africans annually. Young people from poor backgrounds. Young people whose circumstances seemed to have decided their future. Young people who had to work as maids, as laborers, as street vendors, while trying to pursue education. But there was something that set this program apart from other charitable initiatives. Zainab wasn't just giving them money. She was mentoring them personally. She was teaching them about business, about investing, about building wealth not as a privilege for the already rich, but as a skill that anyone could develop. She started visiting schools. She started going into communities. She started talking directly to young people about what had happened to her, not to inspire them with a fairy tale, but to teach them something practical. She taught them that intelligence is something you develop, not something you're born with. That integrity, when maintained over time, becomes an asset. That the skills you develop in difficult circumstances are often the most valuable skills you'll ever have. Within 3 years of the court victory, Zainab had become something far greater than just another billionaire. She had become a symbol that the system wasn't completely rigged, that intelligence and integrity could eventually win out, that the invisible could become visible if they refused to let their circumstances diminish their sense of self. But she had also become a target. People accused her of being ungrateful to Chief Ahmadi, of using his money for her own publicity. Others suggested that her scholarship program was just a way for her to avoid paying taxes. Some even revived the old accusations of witchcraft, claiming that she had used dark magic to maintain her wealth. The criticism came from surprising places. From other rich people who didn't like the questions her existence raised about their own origins. From people within the established business community who saw her as a threat to the natural order of things. Nneka, interestingly, became one of her strongest defenders. The same woman who had screamed, which, in the courtroom, now gave interviews defending Zainab against these attacks. She talked about how wrong she had been, how she had been blinded by prejudice and envy. "I knew Zainab when she had nothing," Nneka said in one interview. "I knew her when my family mocked her. And I knew her, always, to be a person of extraordinary character. The only magic she ever used was the magic of being consistently, stubbornly good in the face of contempt. There is no dark force at work here. Only excellence. And people are afraid of that because it challenges their excuses." But the most shocking moment came during a business conference in Accra, Ghana, exactly 4 years after the court victory. Zainab was speaking on a panel about wealth creation and entrepreneurship. Her co-panelists included 3 men who were considered titans of African business. Billionaires. Men who had built empires. Men who had been featured on every major business magazine across the continent and internationally. One of them, a man named Zainab Okonkwo, had been particularly critical of Zainab in the media. He had suggested that her success was a one-time occurrence, not replicable, that she had gotten lucky with Chief Ahmadi, that her scholarship program was unsustainable and would collapse within a few years. During the Q&A session, Adebayo asked Zainab a question that was designed to humiliate her. "Tell me, Miss Zainab, how did you actually learn business? From cleaning houses? Surely you did not think that practical experience could substitute for formal education." The room went quiet. This was a public attack. A challenge to her credibility. Zainab smiled. Not a defensive smile, but a genuine, knowing smile. "Mr. Adebayo," she said, "I learned business the way I learned everything of value. By observing carefully. By asking questions when appropriate. By studying the decisions of people I respected. By analyzing outcomes. By connecting patterns. And yes, by making mistakes and learning from them." She paused, then continued. "But I want to answer your question with a question. In all your years of formal business education, did anyone teach you that dignity matters? Did anyone teach you that people are more than their positions? Did anyone teach you that wealth without integrity is ultimately a liability?" "The reason I ask," Zainab continued, "is because I have spent the last 4 years investigating the origins of many of Africa's billionaires. And do you know what I found? That many of them built their wealth through exploitation, through taking advantage of people who had no options. People like I was. People like the maids and laborers and street vendors who make their operations possible." She leaned forward. "You became wealthy by taking from the poor. I became wealthy by being honored by someone I served. There is a difference. A fundamental difference. And that difference will determine how our wealth is remembered and what legacy we leave behind." The room erupted. Some people applauded. Some looked shocked. Adebayo's face turned red with anger. After the panel, he tried to continue the argument, but Zainab simply walked away. She had nothing more to prove to him. But that moment, that public confrontation, had an unexpected consequence. It elevated Zainab to a different level in the public consciousness. It wasn't just about her individual triumph anymore.
It was about what she represented.
A challenge to the status quo. A proof that the system could be changed. That wealth and power didn't have to be maintained through cruelty and exploitation. Within a year, 3 other major business leaders started their own mentorship programs for young people from poor backgrounds, inspired by Zainab's model. The conversation in African media started to shift. People began to ask questions about how billionaires had actually acquired their wealth. Investigations were launched. Some of them led to prosecutions for fraud and corruption. But more importantly, there was a change in how young people from poor backgrounds saw their own potential. The Zainab Okonkwo scholarship program became the most competitive in Africa. Thousands of young people applied every year. Many of them were maids or workers or people doing what society considered low work. But they all had the same thing in common. They all refused to let their circumstances define their potential. Zainab's wealth had grown even larger as her investments continued to perform brilliantly. Her business instincts, honed through years of observation and study, proved to be nearly infallible. But that wasn't the most important part of her story. The most important part was what she did with her power once she had it. She used it to change systems, to challenge narratives, to make people see what they had been taught not to see. By the 5th year after the court victory, Zainab was not just richer than the billionaires who had mocked her. She was more influential, more respected, and most importantly, more loved. But the final chapter of the story, the one that would prove that Zainab had truly become something unprecedented in African business, was about to unfold. And it would involve a revelation that even her closest allies didn't see coming. The revelation came from an unexpected source. A journalist named Okonkwo, who had been investigating Zainab's rise for years, published an extensive research piece that revealed something extraordinary. Through access to court documents, financial records, and interviews with people close to Chief Amadi, Okonkwo uncovered the truth about Chief Amadi's real reason for leaving his wealth to Zainab. Chief Amadi, it turned out, had been using Zainab as an informal advisor for nearly all his business decisions for almost 15 years before his death. And more than that, he had been deliberately testing her, training her, preparing her to inherit his wealth not as a gift, but as an earned responsibility. The documents showed that Chief Amadi had kept detailed records of every piece of advice Zainab had given him. The investment she had suggested in the telecommunications company that had become worth billions. The property development she had warned him against, which would have cost him significantly. The market trends she had predicted correctly. There were spreadsheets showing that following her counsel had increased his wealth by more than 40% over those 15 years. Chief Amadi had documented everything. He had recorded his thoughts about Zainab's character, her integrity, her intelligence. He had written about how she had refused money he offered to give her, saying it was against their agreement that she would provide counsel, not be purchased. He had written about how she had maintained her dignity even when his family mocked her. And most importantly, he had written about why he knew she would use his wealth wisely. Zainab has proven that she does not need money to be whole. One of Chief Amadi's journal entries read, "She has proven that she does not desire luxury. She has proven that she cares more about principle than position. These are the qualities of a person who will use wealth for something greater than themselves. This is why I am leaving everything to her. Not out of sentiment, but out of absolute certainty that my life's work will be in the hands of someone who will honor it properly." The revelation changed how people understood Zainab's inheritance. It wasn't luck. It wasn't magic. It was the inevitable result of consistent excellence over time. It was what happened when someone refused to be diminished by their circumstances, when someone maintained integrity over decades, when someone proved their worth through action rather than words. Okonkwo's article became the most shared piece of journalism in Africa for months. It inspired countless think pieces. It sparked conversations on social media. But more importantly, it changed the way young people from poor backgrounds thought about their own potential. If a maid could become not just rich, but genuinely one of the most respected business leaders in Africa, then what could someone else become? What was actually possible? Zainab responded to the article with characteristic grace. She held a press conference where she thanked Okonkwo for his research. She publicly acknowledged Chief Amadi's role in her transformation. She donated a significant portion of her wealth to establish the Chief Zainab Okonkwo Foundation for Business Education, an institution that would provide advanced business training and capital to young entrepreneurs from poor backgrounds. She also did something that surprised everyone who thought they understood her. She reached out to every family member of Chief Amadi, to Khalid, Amara, and Oluwaseun, his 3 children who had initially tried to contest the will. She invited them to become board members of the Chief Amadi Foundation. They were shocked. After the legal battle, many expected Zainab to harbor resentment. But Zainab saw something different. She saw people who had been defined by their wealth and status, just as she had been defined by her poverty and position. She saw people who could either continue to be bitter about losing expected inheritances, or they could choose to become part of something larger. To her surprise, they accepted. They became active members of the foundation. They used their own networks and resources to expand its reach. Within years, what had started as Zainab's personal initiative had become a continental movement. The transformation was so profound that even the initial mockery began to fade from people's memories. Not that it disappeared completely. Some people still made jokes about how the Billionaires had been outsmarted by a maid. Some people still questioned her story, still suggested there was something more to it than she was telling. But the overwhelming sentiment had shifted. What had started as a story of shame and mockery had become a story of redemption and inspiration. What had started as evidence of injustice had become evidence that justice was possible if you refused to accept injustice. On the 10th anniversary of the court victory, Zainab stood in a new building in Lagos, the Zainab Okonkwo Institute for Leadership Development, a state-of-the-art facility that would provide education and mentorship to 10,000 young people annually. Young people from poor backgrounds. Young people who were invisible in their own societies. Young people who had been mocked or overlooked or underestimated. Zainab walked through the halls of the institute, greeting students. Many of them were maids, workers in family homes, street vendors, or other people doing what society considered low work. But they were all here. All of them proving that their circumstances did not define their potential. A young woman approached her. She had been one of the first students in the scholarship program. Her name was Chioma, and she had been working as a housemaid when Zainab found her. Now, after completing the institute's program and being mentored by Zainab herself, Chioma was about to launch her own business. A technology company focused on connecting young workers with educational opportunities. "Thank you," Chioma said to Zainab, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for seeing me. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. You have changed my life." Zainab took Chioma's hands in her own. "I did not change your life," she said gently. "You changed your own life. I simply showed you what was already there. I simply showed you what was already there. The intelligence, the capability, the worth. These things were inside you all along. All I did was help you see them." But even as Zainab spoke these words of humility and grace, she was already thinking about the next challenge. Because her success, while inspiring to many, had also created new problems. Problems that nobody had anticipated. You see, Zainab's rise had inspired a movement. And movements, no matter how positive their intentions, always attract people with different motivations. Within a few years of Zainab's public emergence as a billionaire philanthropist, there were dozens of people claiming to be running similar programs. Some of them were legitimate, but others were scams. They took money from desperate young people, promising them the Zainab Okonkwo experience, then disappeared with the funds. There were also people who tried to exploit Zainab's story for their own gain. Companies that wanted to use her name without her permission. Politicians who wanted to associate themselves with her success. Media outlets that fabricated stories about her to increase viewership. And then there were the people who had built their wealth through exploitation and corruption, who now felt threatened by what Zainab represented. These people began a whisper campaign against her. They suggested that her philanthropic work was just a way to launder money, that she was using her foundation to gain political power, that she was trying to destabilize the existing business structure because she resented the wealthy elite. None of it was true. But in the world of African business and politics, truth is sometimes less important than narrative. And the narrative being pushed against Zainab was powerful because it contained just enough plausibility to make people wonder. The attack came from multiple directions simultaneously. A government official in one country launched an investigation into her foundation, claiming financial improprieties. A business rival published a book questioning whether Chief Amadi had really been of sound mind when he made his will. A tabloid ran a story claiming that Zainab had been involved in a romantic relationship with Chief Amadi, implying that her inheritance was improper. Each attack was designed to undermine her credibility, to make people question whether her success was legitimate, to suggest that she didn't deserve what she had. Zainab's response was measured and strategic. She didn't fight back with anger or defensiveness. Instead, she opened her books completely. Every financial record of her foundation became public. Every transaction, every investment, every salary payment. She invited independent auditors to investigate her operations. She welcomed the government investigation and provided every document they requested. The investigations cleared her completely. The government official who had launched the probe was later found to have received bribes from one of Zainab's business rivals. The book claiming Chief Amadi was not of sound mind was thoroughly debunked by medical experts who reviewed his health records at the time he made his will. The tabloid retracted the romantic relationship story and issued a formal apology. But more importantly, Zainab's decision to be completely transparent won her something more valuable than vindication. It won her trust. People saw that she had nothing to hide, that her success was genuine, that she was building something that would last beyond her lifetime. By the 10th year, Zainab's wealth had grown to approximately 50 billion naira. She was now among the richest people not just in Africa, but in the world. But her wealth was only part of her story. Her legacy was something much larger. Here is where I need to ask you something important, and I want you to really think about this. Think about everything you have learned about Zainab's journey so far. Think about how she went from being mocked as a maid to becoming one of the most respected leaders on the continent. Think about the choices she made, the integrity she maintained, the way she refused to be diminished by her circumstances. Now I want you to consider this question. Have you ever seen something like this happen in real life? Have you ever known someone who refused to accept the limits that society placed on them? Have you ever watched someone transform their circumstances through sheer force of character and intelligence? I want to hear your stories. Drop them in the comments section below. Tell me about the people in your life who have inspired you. Tell me about times when you, or someone you know, refused to be defined by their position or their circumstances. And while you are thinking about that, please like this video if Zainab's story has touched you. Share it with your friends and family, because this is the kind of story that needs to be spread. This is the kind of story that challenges the way we think about success and deserving, and what it really means to be rich. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because we are almost at the end of this incredible journey, and the final chapter contains a revelation that will reshape everything you think you know about Zainab Okonkwo. The final chapter is where we discover that her wealth was never really the point of the story at all. The point was something much deeper, something more profound, something that will change not just how you see Zainab, but how you see yourself and your own potential. On the 15th anniversary of the court victory that made her officially rich, Zainab did something that shocked the entire continent. She announced that she was giving away 80% of her wealth, not to charity, not to her foundation, but to the people directly. She created what she called the African Dignity Fund. The mechanism was simple but revolutionary. Every young person who had completed a training program through one of her initiatives would receive a capital grant. Not a loan, a grant. Free money to start whatever business or pursue whatever education they chose. No strings attached. No requirement to repay it. No expectation of anything in return except that they use it wisely. The amount per person was substantial. Enough to make a real difference. Enough to change a life. Enough to provide options where none existed before. The business community was stunned. Her advisors begged her to reconsider. You will have nothing left, they said. You will no longer be a billionaire. You will lose your influence. But Zainab had learned something that most wealthy people never truly understand. Influence is not determined by how much money you have. It is determined by who you are and what you stand for. And she had become someone who stood for something far greater than personal wealth. Over the next 5 years, the African Dignity Fund distributed approximately 30 billion naira to more than 100,000 young people. Young people who had been invisible. Young people who had been mocked and overlooked. Young people whose society had written off as having no potential. The results were staggering. Within a decade, those young people had launched over 15,000 businesses. They had created over 50,000 jobs. They had built schools and hospitals and community centers. They had transformed entire neighborhoods and regions. And they had all started with nothing but a grant from a woman who had once been a maid. But the most extraordinary part of this story, the part that would ensure Zainab's legacy would live on long after she was gone, came from an unexpected direction. One of the young women who had received a grant from the African Dignity Fund was a girl named Adana. She had been working as a housemaid in Lagos when she entered one of Zainab's mentorship programs. She was brilliant and driven, but she had no money and no family connections to help her advance. With her grant from the African Dignity Fund, Adana started a small business teaching digital literacy to workers in domestic service. She trained them how to use computers, how to access the internet, how to learn skills that could help them transition out of domestic work if they chose to. Her business thrived. Within 5 years, she had trained over 50,000 people. Within 10 years, that number had grown to over 200,000. She had created an entire ecosystem of opportunity for people who had previously been trapped in cycles of poverty. And then Adana did something that completed the cycle. She established the Adana Okonkwo Institute for Worker Empowerment, named after Zainab's foundation. But more than that, she made Zainab an honorary board member and asked her to share her story with every cohort of students who came through the program. So now, twice a month, a woman who had once been a billionaire sat in a classroom with young workers and told them about her journey. She didn't hide the pain. She didn't minimize the mockery. She didn't pretend that her story was simple or easy. She told them the truth. The complicated, difficult, beautiful truth. And every single person who heard her story left that room with something more valuable than any amount of money. They left with a different understanding of what was possible. With a recognition that their circumstances did not determine their destiny. With proof that dignity, once claimed and protected, could never truly be taken away. Zainab had given away most of her money, but she had not become poor. She had become something else entirely. She had become a symbol, a living proof, a testament to the power of integrity maintained over decades. She still lived comfortably. She still had resources. But she lived simply, in a modest home in Lagos. She worked every single day. She mentored young people. She consulted on business ventures that she believed would help others. She traveled across Africa, speaking to communities, sharing her knowledge, challenging systems that she saw as unjust. The irony, which was not lost on anyone paying attention, was that Zainab was now more influential than she had ever been as a billionaire. More respected, more loved, more listened to. The men and women who had mocked her in Chief Amadi's house were now either deceased or had completely transformed their views. Khalid, Chief Amadi's eldest son, had become one of Zainab's closest collaborators. He had taken over much of the business operations of the Chief Amadi Foundation, allowing Zainab to focus on the mentorship and advocacy work that she loved most. Neka, the cousin who had been so cruel, had actually written a book about her journey of learning to see past her own prejudices. The book was a bestseller, and she donated all proceeds to Zainab's foundation. She had become an unlikely but genuine advocate for transforming how society treated domestic workers and people in other service positions. The final twist in this extraordinary story came when Zainab was nominated for the Nobel Prize. Not the Nobel Prize in Economics, which would have been predictable given her business success, but the Nobel Peace Prize. The nomination recognized her work in transforming systems of inequality, in challenging narratives about who deserved respect and opportunity, in creating pathways for human dignity across an entire continent. She did not win that year, but the fact that she was nominated was significant. It meant that the world was beginning to see what she had always known. That true wealth is not measured in money. That true power is not held by those with the most resources. That true success is determined by how you elevate others, how you challenge injustice, and how you maintain your integrity even when nobody is watching. 20 years after the court decision, Zainab sat down for what would be her final major interview. The interviewer, a young journalist who had been one of Zainab's scholarship recipients, asked her the question that everyone wanted to know the answer to. If you could go back to the beginning, to that day when you stood in Chief Ahmadi's kitchen as a newly hired maid, knowing everything you know now, what would you tell that young woman? Zainab was quiet for a long moment. Her hands, still rough from years of work, rested on her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and clear. I would tell her that her circumstances do not define her value, that the work she does with her hands does not reflect the capabilities of her mind. I would tell her that the people who mock her are doing so out of their own fear and insecurity, not out of any truth about who she is. I would tell her to maintain her integrity no matter what, because integrity is the only true wealth. I would tell her that if she refuses to accept the limits that society places on her, if she continues to grow and learn and challenge herself, that one day the world will have to see her as she truly is. She paused, then smiled. But most importantly, I would tell her that the goal is not to become rich, so that the people who mocked her will finally respect her. The goal is to become the kind of person who no longer needs their respect to know her own worth. The goal is to reach a point where you can look at the people who hurt you and feel nothing but compassion for them, because you understand that their cruelty came from a place of limitation in themselves. The interviewer asked one final question. Do you regret giving away your wealth? Zainab laughed. A genuine, joyful laugh that came from deep in her chest. I did not give away my wealth, she said. I distributed it. There is a difference. When you give something away, it implies that you are losing something. But I have not lost anything. I have multiplied it. I have taken what Chief Ahmadi gave me and transformed it into opportunities for thousands of people. I have created a legacy that will outlive me by generations. I have proven that wealth, true wealth, is not something that diminishes when you share it. It grows. It multiplies. It becomes exponentially more powerful. She leaned forward, her eyes intense with passion. The woman who was mocked as a maid is gone. But she did not disappear. She transformed. She became an ancestor. She became a teacher. She became proof that another way is possible. And that, my dear, is richer than any amount of money could ever be. That was Zainab's final public statement. She gradually withdrew from the public eye over the following years, though she never stopped working quietly behind the scenes. She never stopped mentoring. She never stopped challenging systems of inequality. When she passed away, 25 years after that courtroom victory, over 5 million people attended memorial services across Africa and in diaspora communities around the world. Not because she was the richest person who had died, but because she had been the most inspiring. Her legacy lived on through the young people she had mentored, through the businesses they had built, through the systems they had changed, through the way they had learned to see themselves differently, to see their own value, to refuse to accept the limits that society tried to place on them. And every day, in communities across Africa, young workers still heard the story of Zainab Okonkwo, the maid who became richer than the billionaires. Not because of magic or luck or witchcraft, but because she refused to let her circumstances define her destiny. Because she maintained integrity even when nobody was watching. Because she understood that true wealth is measured not in naira or dollars, but in the lives you touch, the systems you transform, and the hope you inspire in others. The final, most beautiful irony of this story is that in the end, Zainab achieved something that no amount of money could ever buy. She became immortal, not through fame or status, but through the endless chain of young people whose lives she had changed, who in turn changed the lives of others, creating a wave of transformation that would continue long after she was gone. That is the real story of Zainab Okonkwo. Not a story about how a maid became rich, but a story about how a woman became free, and how, through that freedom, she freed countless others. And that is something that all the billionaires in the world could never take away from her. Please like, comment, and subscribe.